Welcome back to Rewilded Wellness. I'm Lydia Joy, and today's episode is going to take us on a deep dive into something that might not seem all that sexy. In fact, you might even think it sounds way too simple or maybe boring at first glance, but stick with me because when we take a deeper look at the nuance and complexity around it, it becomes so much more. I'm talking about sulfur. Yes, sulfur. And not just the mineral itself, but what it reflects back to us about our gut health, our detox capacity, the importance of personalized nutrition, and even the emotional and energetic layers we might be ready to release. How about that? On the heels of that Scorpio full moon, we are going to want to release things, right? So in this episode, I think it's going to shift how you think about certain healthy foods and why they might actually be holding your health back, especially if you've been dealing with things like mystery bloating or fatigue or brain fog or unexplained headaches or um, all kinds of hormonal issues because this isn't just about one mineral. It's about what sulfur reveals when we zoom out and look at your unique body terrain. So settle on in, grab your tea, take a breath. Let's go deeper. Okay, more isn't always better. And here's when sulfur becomes this like hidden saboteur. I heard this phrase before. It was pretty recent and it just seems so obvious, but like it really struck me. Like I feel like I have to teach people this constantly in my work that I do with clients, because there's this whole large marketed to us, holistic health space where people, amplify the benefits of such and such food and this and that thing. And here's the phrase: more of anything isn't necessarily better. And in the context of holistic health, this really hits home in a big way, because when we finally, wake up to the power of nutrient dense whole foods, it is so easy to get swept up in that excitement, right? And we hear that something's good for us, maybe some superfood, and suddenly it's on every plate every day, right? Eggs, for example, a powerhouse protein, garlic, antimicrobial, cancer-fighting magic, onions, gut health gold, cruciferous veggies, the detox darlings. And then we stack our meals with these foods, sometimes without realizing it. We've got them woven into breakfast, lunch, dinner, not out of harm, but out of a desire to heal. And here's the catch: without context, without rhythm, even the most nourishing foods can become stressors because our bodies, like the ecosystems we mirror, thrive on diversity, ebb, flow. And our modern culture, it doesn't really honor that. It prizes what's big, fast, more. But real health is, or should I say deep health, it doesn't operate on that frequency. It's a dance of balance and adaptability. And sulfur is a perfect example of this. It is essential. It's a key player in detoxification, enzyme function, connective tissue, and more. But too much sulfur, especially when your pathways of elimination are backed up, say you're low in molybdenum, your bile isn't flowing properly, or your gut microbes are out of balance, and those sulfur superfood meal plans can quietly become your body's burden. I don't know if you can hear, Bazina is barking in the background. Many of my clients arrive to me with a plethora of things, but commonly I'm getting people who have fatigue, brain fog. They have some degree of bloating or holding on to excess weight. And they're very confused as to why, because, they've cleaned up their diet. They feel like they're eating all the, like, maybe they'll say, I'm eating all the right things, right? This is a thing that people say a lot. or I'm eating clean. I don't understand. But they're still feeling wrong in their bodies, right? Maybe they're having eggs every morning and garlic and onions in every dinner and, cruciferous veggies smattered about in their meals, maybe some sauerkraut, maybe they're putting kale in smoothies. I hope people are still not doing that, but or like all these greens powders. There's all kinds of ways we do it. These things are trending, but they're also just readily available to us. But this is sulfur on repeat with kind of no room to breathe. So, and what we've forgotten is that these foods were once used more seasonally, even medicinally, and we didn't have these things available to us year round in the way that we do now. I'll get into that in a bit more. Um, but our ancestors would have worked with the land's rhythms, not the supermarket and the marketing to us rhythms, right? They gave the body pause, and things were a lot different back then, right? But today, we unknowingly overdo it. And when sulfur gets stuck, symptoms are gonna speak up. Things like bloating, gas, skin issues, brain fog, headaches from the pressure that's going on in the vestibular system, um, and even persistent hormonal discomforts that people can't quite explain. So today, this isn't me coming at you with fear or any kind of food rules at all. So please, let's just get rid of the linear black and white thinking right now. It's about awareness. It's about asking deeper questions like, what does my body actually need right now? Because more isn't always better. And healing isn't about piling on. It's about listening. It's about adjusting, making space for your individuality and balance. That's the art of personalized nutrition. That's where healing becomes transformative. This is the direction we need to go in. So let's really quickly talk about the vital role of sulfur in your body. Because before we get into how much too much sulfur can be problematic, I want to just make sure we do understand why it's such an essential nutrient. Sulfur plays a role in some pretty crucial functions, such as our protein structure. It can help form these critical bonds in proteins and ensure that they maintain their proper shape and function. For detoxification, it's essential in producing glutathione, which is one of your body's primary antioxidants, and it is key for detoxing harmful substances. It's important for heavy metal defense because it binds to heavy metals like mercury and lead, helping to detoxify and remove them from your system. It's important for cellular energy, which we need it for several enzymes that are involved in our energy production within our cells. And it's also important for tissue integrity. So your skin, your hair, your connective tissues do rely on sulfur-containing compounds to stay strong and healthy. Okay, there's a lot of food sources of sulfur. But the key ones that are highest would be eggs, garlic, onions, cruciferous vegetables, your broccoli, your cabbage, your Brussels sprouts, and then animal proteins. So those are all the foods that, many people consider beneficial for health. But for some people, that is where part of the problem can begin for them, especially if it's not considered with balance in mind. So when sulfur becomes problematic, let's talk about that. It's when some people have trouble processing it efficiently. There is a whole process in the body, how we metabolize sulfur from sulfite to sulfate, and there can be things not in place properly for some people. But there's another one that, I see all the time on the BiomeFX results that I'm looking at. And this is a key culprit. It's hydrogen sulfide. And this is a compound that's produced when your gut bacteria break down the sulfur in foods. Now, in small amounts, hydrogen sulfide is actually beneficial. But when there's an overload, it can really wreak havoc. The excess hydrogen sulfide can affect your brain and your nervous system. It can lead to issues, like I've said, headaches, brain fog, even dizziness, because it can impact your vestibular system. And that's going to control your balance. So it could even make you feel a little off balance, perhaps. Maybe you feel some weird sort of vertigo type feelings, potentially. It just depends from person to person. But it doesn't stop there. So too much sulfur can cause digestive problems. This can be quite a range from extreme bloating, gas, pressure, or maybe the sulfury stinky gas. It can also swing from diarrhea to constipation. Now those things that I just mentioned will be especially noticeable if you are eating sulfur-rich foods like garlic, onions, cruciferous vegetables, high-protein animal foods. Right now, protein is trending hard, and we're being told to eat tons of protein. And, we've got to have a conversation about that in a future episode so we can make sure we're looking at how the gut deals with all this. But to give you a super quick story, I took a group of people through this is a long time ago. It was 2014, I believe. And I took them through a deeper dive. It wasn't a detox, but it was a deep dive. We did a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things we did was, because everyone was having digestive issues, we did a version of the low FODMAPs diet, which takes out all these fermentable foods, like fermentable carbohydrates, right? So one of those would be oligosaccharides, and within that group are garlic and onions. And every single person, um, you know, had noticed like weight around their belly or a reduction in bloating or just a lot better ease in their digestion and in their gut and in their belly and in their bowels. And when we did the reintroduction, and this was before I knew anything about the biome effects and I had as much information about the gut as I do now, when they started adding these foods back in, they started noticing the symptoms come back. So I'm only sharing that story not because we should not eat these foods, but we should understand how they impact our gut. And I don't think enough people are aware of that or talking about it. And I think a lot of people are also afraid of ending up on yet another elimination diet or food restriction situation. And that is not what I am here to promote today. It's really about awareness. That's why I shared that story. So let's add another layer to the story. Let's get into heavy metals for a second. When you are exposed, and you are to some degree, all of us are, to heavy metals, say for example mercury or lead, these heavy metals are going to compete with essential minerals. They're also going to compete with our gut and do some harm to our microbes. All right, I'm not going to get into that too much today, but from the perspective of the minerals, say, for example, zinc, which can be competed with from a lot of heavy metals, and your body really needs zinc to help you with so many functions, including detoxification. I'm just going to keep it simple here. So when your body can't detoxify properly, sulfur compounds can bind with the metals instead, and especially if there's not enough zinc there, and this can lead to more sulfur buildup in your system. So when your metallothionein, which is the protein that helps your body detox metals, is compromised, it can affect your ability to process sulfur properly. And this can create more of a cascade of negative symptoms. So I'm keeping this very high level and simple today. But if you are someone who maybe knowingly deals with sulfur, you have a sensitivity to it. One of the ways you might know that you have this is if you eat any foods with added sulfites to them, right? I know for me, that was something I found out a long time ago, um, that I would have terrible reactions to added sulfites in food. So if that's you, you might know that that could be a challenge for you. But if you are dealing with this sulfur metabolism issues, which creates a sulfur sensitivity, along with any heavy metal toxicity, say, for example, you have mercury amalgam fillings in your mouth for a lot of years, maybe you even got them out, you still likely have hidden mercury going on in your system, right? And this is all connected. So we have to understand that there's a really big relationship going on between the minerals, the metals, the microbes. And that is really helpful when you have long-term chronic challenges that cannot be solved. We have to dig in and kind of connect all these dots, right? So, um, understanding the relationship between these things can be key to addressing your symptoms. All right. So now I want to talk about what happens when we overdo sulfur-rich foods and our detox pathways are not keeping up. It can kind of quietly overload the system. Now, again, sulfur isn't the villain here. We need it, but it becomes problematic when the body can't process or eliminate it efficiently. Okay, so here's what can happen behind the scenes. We have sulfur reducing bacteria in the gut. They start producing excess hydrogen sulfide gas. This leads to bloating, gas, abdominal discomfort, probably some weight gain, right? You're holding weight in your belly. The hydrogen sulfide can irritate and inflame the gut lining. And a lot of times this can leave it feeling raw or tender or reactive. I've had people tell me this. Um, and then your microbiome can shift, right? It can reduce microbial diversity and then increase systemic inflammation. Then the motility can slow down, right? This can lead to constipation or incomplete digestion or maybe that sluggish, heavy post meal feeling where people are like, oh my gosh, I just don't feel like I can eat any more food. And maybe they don't want to eat as much as they might need to, right? So here's how that can feel in your day to day life, right? So you have bloating that worsens as the day progresses. You might feel fine in the morning, but by dinner you feel inflamed or foggy or uncomfortable. Maybe you have digestive distress, like you have excessive gas, or you have irregular bowel movements, or either or smell like sulfur. um, you might have some fatigue that hits you harder after higher sulfur meals, even if you're eating real food, you're eating clean, right? Like, and you get this fatigue and you're like, what on earth? It could be you had more sulfur than your body can process, and it is affecting your detox pathways and slowing you down. Headaches or even migraines that might seem random, but if they follow certain meals that are high in sulfur, there is part of your answer. Hormonal flares around your cycle, particularly with worsened PMS or breast tenderness, joint pain, muscle tension, or body aches that ebb and flow with your diet, brain fog or poor focus, especially in the late afternoon or evening, anxiety, irritability, or mood swings that feel tied to food but are hard to trace. Skin issues like rashes, itchiness, or breakouts that seem unresponsive to topical care, and heightened sensitivity to smells, bright light, or loud noises. And these are also two signs that your nervous system is taxed. And these are patterns that show up again and again in the work that I do with clients, and they're often confirmed through multiple means, the HTMA, the hair tissue mineral analysis, the BioMFX stool tests that I do, or even genetic markers like CBS, SUOX, and other SNPs that are involved in sulfur metabolism. Okay, so what's tricky about sulfur sensitivity is that it rarely shows up all neat and tidy. It can hide behind this like cluster of symptoms that don't always seem related, and most people have no idea that their body's difficulty detoxifying sulfur is behind it. So for example, as I mentioned, the headaches, the dizziness, the brain fog, the poor focus can often trace back to the vestibular system, which gets affected when there is a toxic burden that the body can't move through, especially when the sulfur load is high and stuck. Right? And it's not just about the gut, it's about how sulfur's impact travels through the whole system. And this is why, personalized nutrition is so powerful because it helps us identify where energy is being lost, where there's backlogs, where there's stagnation, where there might be difficulty utilizing certain nutrients. Many people would never think to look at deeper roots like these mineral imbalances, genetic detox pathways, or gut dysbiosis when they're experiencing, something as seemingly normal as, maybe sinus congestion or joint tension or hormonal swings, right? They might be trying to blame other things, right? I have had clients who were dealing with chronic sinus congestion and regular headaches, and nothing. Going to the chiropractor was like one of the things, and nothing really was helping long term because it kept coming up for her. So when we ran our HTMA, I noticed this pretty significant sulfur imbalance along with really big inflammation in her body and some sluggish detox markers. And then we sat down and like really reviewed what she was eating. And she was eating some high sulfur foods repeat, like eggs pretty much every day, garlic and onions in almost every savory meal, um, you know, as an example of two of the biggies. And she thought she was doing good with her diet, which she was. There's nothing was, she wasn't doing anything extreme. She was doing a pretty good job, but the problem was her body wasn't agreeing with the real foods that she was eating, right? Like in this particular instance, it was too much sulfur for what was going on in her system. And that's the thing. It's never just about the quality of food, although that is huge and that could be a big deal for all of us, um, to make major gains in our health. But it really is always going to be about how our body is using it, right? So repetition without balance can create stagnation, especially when our metabolic pathways have been and are compromised. Right? So we brought in some dietary shifts. We started to support her really gently, actually. And this gave her body some room to breathe. And things did begin to change. She noticed her headaches lightened, and didn't like fully manifest. She didn't feel stuck in that frustrating loop anymore. She had some pressure relief in her head and congestion. I've had other clients who have a lot of bloating and burnout, and maybe they aren't eating as much food as they should be, right? Like they're just very limited in how much food they're able to eat because they're too bloated to eat more food or enough food to truly nourish them. And a lot of times when we look at what they're eating, they love their garlic, they love their onions, and they're putting it in and on everything every single day with no idea because, part of it is like, oh, I can't eat very much food. I'm really full. So let me put seasonings on my food, right? And what do they choose? Garlic and onions. And unfortunately, oftentimes that can backfire, especially when the HTMA might show a really high sulfur to copper ratio, a low molybdenum, and other things, right, that point to the sluggish detox. And then the biome effects can show that elevated hydrogen sulfide for one thing, and that's gonna play a role as well. So when we scale back those foods, right, maybe take a break for a while, because if you are relying on anything every single solitary day, for a really long time, and you've had chronic long-term symptoms that haven't let up, it's always worth taking them out for a while to see how your body responds, right? So we scale back the sulfur-rich foods, start to support the drainage pathways very gently, and this will help the terrain regain some balance, right? And quite frankly, in many cases, the results can be kind of like this night and day within, days to a couple weeks. Once you get over the emotional sadness that you're losing a food you love, and the challenge of trying to figure out what to eat now instead, right? Like there's always this little bumpy spot. Um, but I've had, people write to me and just 2 weeks into, bringing down that overall consumption of high sulfur foods, not taking them out entirely, just taking a solid look at what they're doing and seeing it's okay. I've been eating a lot, so let's bring it down. Let's bring in some new foods. Let's diversify, right? I recently had someone say, um, that they had no bloating. They dropped 5 pounds of inflammatory water weight, and that they had no breast tenderness with their cycle, which was something they were getting all the time. And then a surprising thing happened, and they had a constant like hip flexor piriformis tension going on. And they noticed that that was like releasing a lot, and they were kind of surprised by that. So it's interesting how the body can hold tension in all these places, right? But when you finally take this look and you see what the sulfur is trying to tell you, that's what can happen when the body is finally like being heard for the things it's saying to you loudly through symptoms, right? So when we stop force feeding ourselves foods that don't fit our current state, no matter how healthy they may seem, and instead just begin honoring what we need right now, right? This is the whole piece. Like awareness is what makes it possible to start bring balance back, right? And this is, to me, personalized nutrition isn't about restriction. It's about connection or reconnection. And part of that is about listening for the clues, understanding the terrain, getting educated on all these pieces, right? And then gently removing what's blocking the body's natural flow. Now, I want to talk a little bit about sulfur foods, if you will, through an ancestral lens. So we can kind of like zoom out for a second here and reclaim some context. So when it comes to sulfur-rich foods like eggs, garlic, onions, cruciferous vegetables, right? Many people are going to assume, but I thought these foods are healthy, or that since these foods are healthy, more is better, right? But that mindset has roots in modern convenience and marketing, not in nature. Now, our ancestors had a completely different relationship with these foods, and that was more shaped by seasonality, necessity, balance. Sure, there were times of survival, right? Too. But primarily, it wouldn't be based on this repetition or excess or convenience. So take eggs, for example. In a pre-industrial world, chickens didn't lay eggs year-round, right? Without that artificial light and controlled temperatures, egg production would slow significantly in the fall and winter, particularly in colder climates. And they would have been more abundant in the spring and summer. And it kind of aligns with the body's natural detox rhythm. So eating them daily year round wouldn't have been a thing. And for many people today, that daily repetition especially alongside other high sulfur foods, can quietly contribute to detoxification, backlog, and inflammation. Garlic and onions were treated more like medicine than they were daily staples. They were used in broths and immune supporting rituals. They were respected for their potency. Um, these aromatics were cured and stored, and sometimes they infused them into vinegars or they used them during seasonal illnesses. But they weren't necessarily tossed into every single dish every day, year round for our whole lives, right? That's what I think a lot of us do. Um, then there are cruciferous vegetables, and a lot of the reason why we do this is because it's convenient and it provides flavor and taste, and we just haven't learned how to work with other plants, right? We collectively in the United States, we hang on to like a short list of certain things, and this is one of them, garlic and onions. We definitely abuse it in this culture. Then we have cruciferous vegetables. We've got, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, a whole bunch of them. And today they're promoted as detox powerhouses. But, there's a lot to say about this. Many of them are modern cultivars. They're bred for uniformity, yield, shelf life. They might not necessarily be the same varieties our ancestors consumed. It's not necessarily wrong or bad. It's just a difference that we don't think about, right? Um, we would have had different versions of these plants, like, say, for example, wild mustard greens. Um, and they would have just been eaten more seasonally and sparingly. And when cabbage was harvested, it was often fermented into kraut. Um, And it wasn't consumed in, like, copious amounts, right? It was, like, more of a condiment, right? And this was to provide the preservation, but it also gave us some additional benefits, such as digestive support and gut support. It's not like we roasted them every night or pulverized them raw into smoothies, which I think people are still doing, or juices or whatever. Um so, ancestral diets were inherently varied. No one was eating the same, 15 foods on repeat, right? They were eating what was available in their region and season. Because of the foraging that I do, I have learned that there are far more plants than we even know. Right? So we would have just approached this completely differently. And so it would have built in natural diversity and digestive rhythm. And modern living has just, like, flattened that instinct, right? We've traded variety for convenience, which isn't all that convenient in the long run, especially because our gut and body can suffer. Now, if we overlay all of this with our current environment, we're exposed to far more toxins than our ancestors, the plastics, the pesticides, the medications, the mold, the heavy metals, the EMFs, right? All of which place a heavier burden on sulfur metabolism and detox pathways. And many people now carry genetic polymorphisms like MTHFR, CBS, SUOX. These things can compromise our ability to methylate properly or clear sulfur efficiently. So the result can be even these healthy foods can begin to work against us if the body's capacity is overwhelmed. So this is why sulfur becomes such a complex layer in modern nutrition, not because these foods are inherently bad, but because they're being consumed in ways that no longer match our biological bandwidth. The real issue isn't the food, it's the mismatch between modern habits and our body's terrain. So, repetition without awareness, overconsumption without capacity, superfoods without seasonal context. Your gut, like any ecosystem, thrives on diversity, rhythm, and balance, not overload, not extremes, not monotony, not extreme emotional attachment to certain foods either. Oh, we all have that, right? So, by looking back at this and reflecting on how we once ate and really doing our best to start to reconnect with nature's timing, we begin to remember it's not about restriction, it's about the right fit and the right timing. And sometimes that does mean less sulfur and more rotation and a whole lot more seasonal intuition. So, before you can actually ask if a given food is right for you always need context for how your body is going to actually use it. Okay, right? So, with sulfur as the example here today, most people have no idea that sulfur, while vital for detoxification, for skin health, for connective tissue and immune function, can easily be overdone in today's world. And when it is, it often leads to the symptoms that are hard to trace back to food, which I mentioned. I'll say it again. Things like headaches, brain fog, sinus congestion, bloating, histamine reactions, tight fascia and muscle tension, anxiety or irritability after meals, right? So, this is why it's not just about what you're eating, but whether your body can handle, transform, and eliminate what you eat, right? So, instead of guessing, we get curious, we dig into data, we ask all these questions, right? Like, is a person's detox system open and flowing? Are their mineral reserves sufficient to support sulfur metabolism? Has your gut terrain shifted into a state of dysbiosis that makes sulfur harder to handle? Are your genes influencing how well you process and clear sulfur compounds? Are your energetics even wired for heat, speed, or overload, which could make sulfur an aggravator, right? And so, to answer these questions, here's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a HTMA, a hair tissue mineral analysis, because your mineral terrain tells us a lot about your detox readiness, especially when it comes to sulfur. So here's a little bit. Sulfur-related HTMA markers might include a high sulfur to copper ratio. This is often linked to poor detox, to fungal overgrowth, or copper dysregulation. Low molybdenum. Molybdenum's a cofactor in breaking down sulfur-containing compounds. And people wouldn't know that anything about this unless they did a hair test. Elevated sodium and potassium ratio, which can point to inflammation, overstimulation of the adrenals, and this can increase sulfur sensitivity. Something like a high calcium, a high tissue calcium, a calcium shell. This is associated with sluggish detox pathways, and even hypersensitivity reactions that someone might not be aware of, because this is a very blocked state, right? It's very difficult to determine what's really affecting someone when they're in this pattern. And then low lithium can signal emotional reactivity, and that often pairs with sulfur intolerance. That's just something I've noticed in in many of my clients. So this is where we see these patterns of either backlog or burnout and different biochemical imbalances. There's a lot more that could be said, but those are some of the things that I've been noticing. Then I look at the biome effects, which is, a microbiome test, to kind of see like your inner terrain, what's going on, who's there, what are they doing, how are they affecting you? And your gut bugs play a massive role in how you handle sulfur. And some sulfur related microbiome red flags can include elevated sulfur reducing bacteria like Disulfo vibrio or Bilophila wadsworthia. If people have those, they are bloated. They are so bloated. Low diversity or missing keystone strains. Or perhaps someone has high methane or high hydrogen sulfide production. Or they might have an overgrowth of opportunistic pathogens that can feed on sulfur, right? So it can be mold-related dysbiosis, candida, things like that. And in these cases, even a healthy sulfur food might fuel the extreme symptoms of those patterns, right? Like the gas, the bloating, the brain fog, the fatigue. Then we can look at genetic SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms. And these are things that um, they don't determine your fate. These inherited variations that we all have, they don't determine your fate, but they do influence how your body handles things, and sulfur is one of them. So some of the genes that impact sulfur metabolism include CBS. When that's upregulated, it can accelerate sulfur metabolism and overwhelm the downstream pathways. Then we have SUOX, which is important for converting sulfites to sulfate for excretion. And if there are impairments here, that can lead to buildup and sensitivity. MTHFR, the one that everyone knows about, this affects methylation. And when it can actually indirectly support sulfur clearance and detox flow. And then GST, my bad, is glutathione transferases that handle detox. So when there are impairments here, it makes it harder to neutralize reactive sulfur intermediates. So knowing your SNPs can help you work with your body's blueprint, not against it. And then we can go even more deep and nuanced and get into medical astrology, right? This is like your energetic terrain, your detox archetype, get into some of your constitutional things that are needed for you, right? Like this is your cosmic wiring. It can offer insights into your body's detox style. So here are a few energetic patterns that could impact sulfur sensitivity, right? Fire heavy charge. That would be me, by the way. I have of all the elements, I have the most fire in my chart. So this is a very personal episode as well, by the way. It's very real for me. So fire heavy charts, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, they can tend towards excess heat and inflammation. And this can be easily triggered by sulfuric stimulation. If you have a really strong Mars placements, this is also associated with heat, action, speed, and sometimes overdrive. The air signs such as Gemini, Aquarius, they may have a little bit of depending on the whole chart, of course, weak grounding. They might struggle with nervous system regulation, which can influence histamine and sulfur responses. And then if people have like weak Saturn or Earth placements, then they have, less structure, less resilience, or mineral anchoring. Now, this isn't diagnostic. It's just a lens, right? It's just another way to consider the whole terrain of who you are. I find it to be useful and wildly fascinating, and it tends to match when I'm looking at people as a whole with all these different bodies of information. It all tends to kind of like match up and be incredibly helpful. So, moving forward, you always have the understanding of your chart, your genetic SNPs, those two are not going to change. And then when you're testing current terrain through HTMA and BioMFX, you can match it up to those and get a really beautiful full spectrum look at what things you can be doing to support your health. So to me, this is like rewilded wellness, right? It's like rooted in nature, rhythm, nuance. We're not slapping labels like good or bad on real foods. We're asking like, what are these foods asking my body to do? And can I actually do it right now? Right? That's the essence of personalized nutrition, honoring the body's language. It's the way back to resilience. And I believe it's the way forward. I believe it's the way we need to get to, based on where we are at collectively. Now, before we wrap up, I want to zoom in on the deeper symbolic meaning of sulfur because it isn't just a mineral. It holds powerful meanings in esoteric traditions, and it's deeply tied to transformation, energy, and personal power. So in alchemy, sulfur is known as one of the 3 essential substances alongside mercury and salt. Sulfur is often associated with the process of transmutation or the turning of base metals into gold. But more symbolically, sulfur represents the fire element, spirit, and the transformative force within us. And when we think about health and healing through this alchemical lens, sulfur becomes a potent metaphor for purification and renewal. So, just as sulfur has the power to change the very structure of metals, it also plays a role in our own healing journeys, right? Burning away impurities, toxins, and stagnation in the body. Now, just as too much sulfur in the body can lead to imbalance, the alchemical process of transformation has to be very carefully controlled, right? Balance is key. So if you have too much fire, it can destroy, but just enough can forge strength and clarity. So this reminds us of the importance of tuning into our body's unique needs, not overloading it with what's considered healthy, but understanding how much is required for genuine sustainable transformation. Now, sulfur also holds a deep connection to the solar plexus chakra, which is often referred to as the third chakra. It's situated just above the navel, and it's like the center of our personal power, our self esteem, and transformation. When the chakra is balanced, it allows us to step into our own authority, manifest our goals, and align with our true potential. So, just as sulfur aids in the transformation of matter in alchemy, the solar plexus chakra is the center where we harness our internal energy for change and personal growth, right? And this chakra's color is yellow, and that's linked to sulfur's vibrant energy, and its element is fire, which ties back to sulfur's symbolic role as a fuel for transformation. When the solar plexus chakra is imbalanced, you might experience like a lack of confidence, digestive issues, or a sense of being stuck. And just like too much sulfur in the body can overload our detox pathways, an overactive solar plexus can lead to feelings of burnout, stress, or excessive control. So it's really about finding the sweet spot, an empowered, centered energy that fuels your ability to move forward while staying grounded and balanced. So, you know, this deeper understanding isn't just poetic. It can be incredibly practical, and it invites us to listen to our bodies with new ears, right? When we look at sulfur through these symbolic lenses, we can begin to see our health journeys as transformative processes, much like the alchemists viewed the purification of metals. So, your healing isn't just about removing toxins or fixing a symptom. It's really about engaging in a deeper energetic transformation, right? If you imagine your body as a vessel in the alchemical process, full of potential, ready for transformation, you're not just detoxing or healing, you're purifying, you're restructuring your health, you're clearing out what no longer serves you and aligning with your highest state of wellness. So, incorporating this perspective can offer a sense of empowerment and clarity. It's not just about solving the problem, it's about understanding that every step you take in healing is a part of a greater ongoing transformation, one that connects you to your true power, your capacity to heal. So, when sulfur shows up in your journey, whether through your diet, your symptoms, or your healing practices, let's try to recognize it not as an enemy, but as a guide to use on your journey into your personal alchemy, right? Like we can use this knowledge as a tool for empowered transformation and let it honor both the body's wisdom and our soul's journey towards balance. So, if you've been bloated, foggy, or stuck on a healthy diet that doesn't feel quite right or good, um, maybe take a look at sulfur. Not to blame it, just to notice, to ask deeper questions that we talked about in this episode. Because we all deserve a body that feels light and clear and nourished. And we all deserve a game plan or a protocol that honors our unique terrain. And I think that we can rewild the way that we care for our bodies one layer at a time. So I'll leave you with this. More isn't always better, but more awareness, that is where the magic begins. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Be sure to check out the show notes. I do have a link to a blog post on sulfur and bloating if you want to check that out. And if you're ready to go deeper into your inner terrain, you can learn more about working with me over on my website. Those links are in the show notes below. There are a few ways. One of my favorite is the Rewilded Wellness program that I offer that covers all the 4 data points that I expressed in this episode. So definitely go ahead and over there and check that out. And until next time, stay curious, stay wild, stay nourished, and stay well.